Well, welcome everybody to today's CSPEN webinar, Assuring ADA Compliance during the COVID-19 push to online. We are experiencing some technical difficulties, not on our end, but on GoToWebinar's end. But we will have Michael McCaffrey here with us. I've got him on the line. We're just working on making sure you can see the PowerPoint presentation. So hopefully we can do that. But Michael, welcome, and all of the attendees, welcome. Hopefully I can pull the webinar up, at least the slide presentation, and we can put that on online. Let me see. Michael, are you and everybody seeing the presentation now?
Yes, I see it.
Good. Well, at least we got that part done. I am looking to see how many people have come in. Right now, I'm not showing, it's interesting, it's not showing there's the dashboard. We've got some 75 plus attendees here of the 200 and some odd that have registered, but we are still minutes before the start. So hopefully you all are making your way into the webinar, and we're going to get started here in just about another 5 to 7 minutes. We might take a few more minutes before we start, given the fact that, again, we are experiencing some technical difficulties on GoToWebinar's end. You can imagine that their platforms are probably being overutilized, as all of them are right now with the COVID-19 virus and all of the utilization now of online. Give us a few minutes and we will get started. A couple other reminders. We will be taping all of this presentation, so not only will you have the website at your disposal for the future, but you'll also have the audio of the presentation to go along with all of that. We also do offer the opportunity for question and answer and chat. So if you see on your right-hand column the opportunities for Q&A or chat, please provide those. And as Michael goes through the webinar, I will keep an eye on those and try and either interject them as he goes through, or probably more realistically at the end. That way we can hear his whole presentation and then work with him and work through him on the questions that you all have for us today. We do have another 4 or so minutes before the top of the hour. I'm going to put everything on pause for right now, close my microphone, but leave my screen up, and we will get started in about another 5 minutes. Michael, you can see them moving through, correct?
Yep.
Just making sure. Welcome to the over 150 of you now that are online with us for today's CSPEN webinar. We are experiencing, or we should say GoToWebinar may be experiencing some technical difficulties, so we're going to wait another minute or two from now before we officially get started. A couple of do's and don'ts and reminders. CSPEN always audio tapes their webinars so that we can put them up on our website for you to review at your leisure. We will do the same thing with this webinar as we've done with many others in the CARES series. So we will do that again for this particular webinar. You do have on your dashboard the ability for you to either utilize the chat function or the Q&A function to pose questions throughout the course of today's webinar with Michael McCaffrey. We will look at those questions, or I'll monitor those questions throughout the course of his presentation, and then provide the opportunity for Q&A probably at the end, or maybe intermingled in his presentation if there are a couple of spots where it may be appropriate. If we do not get to all of your questions on today's webinar, as we always do, we will attempt to take those questions that we were unable to answer, put them into a Word document form, filter them back through our panelists, in today's case, Michael, and then ship them out to you all at a later point in time. We do have individuals continuing to register, that have registered that are continuing to come online. So give us about another 1 to 2 minutes and we'll get started. Angie, Cindy, Wendy, any of you, are you able to hear us now? Can one of you respond in the question and answer portion? Okay. Whew. The world of modern technology. I hope everybody can hear us, Michael. I think that we've got everybody pretty much back online now. We do have the 198 registrants, which is a pretty good showing out of the 250 that have registered, and I'm sure more will come in. But we do recognize that your time is very valuable, so we are going to go ahead and get started. I want to once again thank all of you for today's participation in the continuation of the CSPEN series of webinars on the CARE Act and the ripple effect, quite honestly, that goes along with the CARES Act. Today, we'll be focusing the vast majority of our attention on an aspect that might be a scotoma, might have been a blinder or just out of your peripheral vision, which is the recognition that whether it's your website in general, or specifically now with the conversion over to, as a result of COVID-19, to a number of different modalities related to distance and online education, there are a number of requirements and compliance regulations that focus around the American with Disabilities Act. And those are issues that we probably want to get to on a regular basis, but in the interest of time, and certainly with all of the other things that we at CSPEN appreciate that you have going on in your regular day before the national emergency took hold and before you were brought to the requirements to convert to online education to sustain your ability to provide a quality education to your students, things had to change. And one of the major things that changed was the utilization of technology for all of its certainly good, and then potentially, like with days like today, potentially questions of whether or not all of you are able to get online and to hear us, given some of the glitches that may be happening on the GoToWebinar end. If you can't hear us, this is being recorded We will make sure that everybody that is registered receives a copy of this presentation and the information that it contains, which is a great deal. I'm looking forward to hearing Michael in just a few minutes as well. Before we get to that, I do want to start with just a very, very brief update from the broader perspective. We do recognize that many of you have seen all of our email blasts and updates, including over the Easter weekend. I apologize, but the timely the information released by the department necessitated us providing you with information over the weekend. A lot of that focused on the ability to begin the process or contemplate how to begin the process of drawing down the recipients portion of the CARES Act emergency higher education funds under the Education Stabilization Fund within the CARES Act. Many of you by now realize that that is not as easy of a task as we had hoped. The original thought process was that you would be simply filling out a form called the recipient or student funding certification and agreement, but there is certainly much more to that process now, as you have to navigate through grants.gov and a number of different steps, including, if you haven't previously been a part of grants.gov, getting new numbers and new information to go along with that you already have, your DUNS numbers and the like. CSPEN will be providing, I'm sorry for the phone, but you can tell I'm working from home. What you need to do is recognize that there are a number of steps. CSPEN will be hosting 2 webinars next week. One, the first part of the week, will continue the discussion around distance education and the conversion to distance and online education through a long conversation with Leah Matthews, which I hope many of you are familiar with, is the executive director of the Distance Education Accrediting Commission. She'll talk about not only the conversion and some things that her community is doing to assist broader portions of the community in that transition. She'll also focus on remarks on the notice of proposed rulemaking on distance education and innovation that came out from the department on April 2nd, and comments are due to the NPRM by May 4th. CSPEN will be working on those in collaboration with the community, and then sharing some tips and some forecasting of what she thinks the future will look like in education and whether or not we've truly reached a tipping point now that so many of you are at least dipping your toe into the water of distance education. We'll follow that up next Thursday with a presentation where we will walk you step by step through the application process for the student portion of the funds under the Emergency Stabilization Fund, Higher Education Emergency Education Fund. But for now, we're going to switch back over to today's topic, website accessibility in higher education, and specifically the focus on how to ensure that all of your online and all of your virtual information meets with ADA compliance. We do have the individual who established the National Digital Disabilities Association, Michael McCaffrey, with us today, who has been gracious enough, and I've spoken with him several times. This was a webinar we were thinking about doing, an outreach we wanted to do even before COVID, but now with the advent of COVID and the fact that all of you are transitioning to, certainly in the near term, a much more online community, we thought that it was best to share this information with you. With that, Michael, I'm going to turn it over to you and say thank you very, very much for your participation today. I'll try and navigate the slides with you, and we'll go from there. Michael, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Thanks everyone for joining the call today. I appreciate you having me on. Tom, we can go ahead and jump to slide 2 real quick. So just to get things started, I wanted to quickly go over our goal. So I'm not going to read everything line by line, but what I wanted to do today was cover a little bit of the background and the guidelines that are impacting universities and colleges. I wanted to cover some of the steps that you can do to jumpstart your journey towards accessibility, and then really kind of finish it off by explaining how we can help you work on accessibility and how NDDA helps. So Tom, we can jump. So slide 3, just a little bit of background on who we are. Really with NDDA, our mission is to help make digital content available to all users. How do we do this? Well, we empower and support schools to become compliant by providing them the tools and some of the knowledge to get started. We found that from the schools and the corporations we work with, there's a wide range. There's folks who have internal teams who are already working on accessibility, and maybe they need some training or some assistance. And then we have on the other end of the spectrum some teams who maybe aren't even aware of it. So our goal is to come in, we help. I'll go into the actual steps on how we do it, but the last part of the slide here, who we are, we do have a lot of experience working with the guidelines. We're members of the World Wide Web Consortium that actually makes the WCAG guidelines. We're members, we help work on the latest iteration of the guidelines, and also certified experts with assistive technology, that's the screen readers and other tools. And we're specifically certified by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. And finally, we've been recognized as expert witnesses in federal court. So I currently have a case right now I'm working, helping a company with, and then I've had 4 other cases in the past 2 years. So definitely have experience understanding where some of these lawsuits are coming, and then how we can help companies become accessible and mitigate some of these risks. So, Tom? Jump to 5. There you go. Okay. So next one. Sorry, I think I'm a little bit delayed there. Really, what we're looking at here, this is accessibility in higher education. I have 2 guidelines I wanted to cover. You can click the link in the slide to, and we'll send this out afterwards too, I'm sure, to actually get to the guidelines to read more. But there's really 2 areas that converge and are impacting it, higher education. So the first is, you'll see there, the Office of Civil Rights, the Technology Accessibility Guidelines that was released in 2010. And really the summary there is that schools and colleges really need to make sure that they're fully accessible to individuals with disabilities, and they're providing equal access to the same education benefits afforded by technology. So that's from the Office of Civil Rights. And then under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the most recent update was January 27, update of Section 508. And that's really making it clear that the specific technology requirements for the schools, how they're required to ensure their apps, digital content, PDFs, websites are all accessible to people with disabilities. So there's a bit of the background and links for more reading too. One of the questions we commonly get is, what must be accessible? And this isn't just for students. I think that's something, of course, learning management systems, Blackboard, et cetera, and working with your students, of course, that's important. But one of the areas that seems to be missed sometimes is prospects. So just a prospect coming to your website, can they complete a form? Can they start an application? So whatever even non-students just coming to learn more about you through your website, maybe a mobile app. And then once they're on your site, do you have that maybe an ebook or PDF, other documentation or forms that they can download? Are they accessible, right? So these are just kind of a sampling of some of the different things that must be accessible. Tom, we can jump to the next one and just be on this for a second. So I got this from a third-party organization, and it's a list of some of the schools, and you can see the source at the bottom. You can follow that. Just a jaw-dropping number of schools that have been impacted. You may have seen some of the Harvard and MIT in the news for their online distance learning, and their classes not being accessible to deaf or hearing impaired users. So long list of colleges here, so it is a real threat. The next slide, Tom, that actually has a bit more about some of the lawsuit trends, and this is really eye-opening. And you can see really what we're seeing here is going back to 2013, how many, and this isn't just schools, but any corporation that's had a suit brought against them for ADA non-compliance of digital properties. And you can see it's been double-digit, triple-digit year-over-year growth. Especially you can see where it really starts to take off at 2017. This 2017 to 2020, you can see that the cases we were at just under 1,000 cases in 2017, and we're projected to hit well over 11,000 cases this year. And the final point here to keep in mind, this doesn't include demand letters. This doesn't include anything from the OCR. This is just plaintiff filing in federal court against the corporation. So big numbers here. Tom, we can jump to the next. One of the things I'm speaking a lot to, and I actually had a call, not with the school, but it was with an online retailer last week who came to us, and they have, what they explained was that their stores are closed, everything now is moved online, and that they're more dependent on ever on those sales, and they're specifically saying that every customer that comes to our site, there's a clothing retailer, they're like, my goal is to make sure that we don't lose one customer because of any type of mobility, hearing, vision, any type of issue. So we're working closely with them now. And I know that just in the online area with higher education, I've spent just about 10 years working in higher education in various roles. And I know with high unemployment and push to online learning, that there is going to be a lot of attention and focus, obviously, on the online courses. And it just seems like a timely, an interesting point in time where we see this, potential spike in demand for classes, and then everything's just online. So it definitely kind of drives home the point of making sure that our digital properties are, we eliminate any accessibility barriers so we get the highest number of traffic as possible. So, Tom? So what I wanted to cover here, just that was a bit of the background. Now I wanted to do a high-level overview of some of the steps that you would take to begin your journey to accessibility. And so what I have here is 5 steps. The first is planning, obviously, right? So when we talk about planning, it's really sitting down with your school, understanding the complete ecosystem of all the digital properties. Is it just a website? Do we have multiple websites? Maybe we have multiple campuses. Each one has its own website. Are there also social media channels that are using mobile apps? And then really even other things I mentioned, like the PDF. So are there important documents that we have either online or on an app that someone's going to download? Have they been tested to ensure that they're compliant? So the first step, number 1, planning, really understanding what's out there, and then developing even the policies internally. So once we understand that we have issues and we know that we can do some things to make our properties more accessible, what are the employee policies that we have in place? So who's going to be the owner for that? What employees are going to work on this? Who's going to be responsible? What kind of reporting is going to be there? And then also even having that accessibility policy, something that is publicized on your website is going to help, right? So that you can explain, here's the steps we're taking to become more accessible. So really number 1 is starting with the plan. 2 is actually auditing, pretty simple, going through based on, we usually do it based on usage, right? The highest risk. If you have a new app you just rolled out, maybe it's not very utilized yet, but the website gets a tremendous amount of traffic. So maybe we start with the website first, or internally your team will focus on the website. So you go through, you do the audit, understand where your current state analysis, where you want to go, and then the gap in between. So that really takes us to number 3, the remediation. The remediation, from what we've seen, is that it takes most companies at least a year to become accessible. So that's something that we can help with, but it's also internally where we're going to identify and say, here we have this number of issues. Here's the barriers that it's presenting, and we're going to rank these based on the highest severity. So that remediation, although it could take a year or so, we want to make sure that we're focusing on issues right now that are the highest mitigation. And so one of the examples I always give is if your homepage, let's just say you have a nice banner, has an image in there, and that image has some type of promotion for signing up, some type of benefit, anything like that that's important for prospects and students. So that image, can that be read by a screen reader? Can the link inside of the image, perhaps, or the text embedded in the image, is that announced to a blind user? Is it in the correct font so the color contrast is perceivable by a low vision or a colorblind user? So that's just an example. But so once we understand that, we can say that, hey, we want to remediate the stuff on the homepage first. We want to remediate, X, Y, and Z next. And so we're just going to kind of rank order, begin working and fixing those changes. And then I see most companies stop there. at step 3. So we also have steps 4 and 5. That's document and monitor. Document is really now we're building and internally saying that we have this team that is working on accessibility. We are on this timeline, and this is something that down the road, if there's ever any type of issue, question, or litigation or anything else, we now have this trend of compliance to say, hey, we've been working on this. We started 2 years ago. We have X number of issues. We're down to this, right? So documenting what's been done, and then monitoring. So we've understood where the gaps are. We've fixed the gaps. We've documented so that we understand what the problems were, how they've been fixed for future releases now, and then finally monitoring. This is a step that's also overlooked because what we're seeing with the monitoring is, okay, we made the site and now it's 3 months later and there's been new images, new documents that have been uploaded. Maybe that hasn't been tested. So what policies do we have in place? What employees maybe are involved in monitoring, or even software to help us catch an issue, as opposed to waiting to hear a complaint from a prospect or a student. So that's kind of steps 1 through 5. Jumping to the next, how can we help you? And so one of the things that we found is that website developers who are trained and certified in accessibility, you can see the first bullet point, they're hard to come by and they're expensive. External audits by third parties can also be expensive and time consuming, and we've seen a range usually in the $15,000 to $20,000 range of a full website audit. And then when you do an audit, something that's important to keep in mind, someone will review it, we'll test it from a desktop perspective, but it also has to be tested on mobile. So is it responsive? Does your website work? It may work on desktop, but is it working on a mobile phone and an iPad? Not an app, but just a mobile responsive version of your website. So that's when you start seeing these high prices for having a third party external auditor come in and audit your entire website. So how does NDDA help? You can see, first thing is we really look at this as a low-cost way to jumpstart your accessibility journey. This doesn't guarantee, this isn't a magic wand, it's not going to make anyone accessible overnight. But really, this is giving you some of the tools and resources to help you understand what to do, right? So by joining, I'll get into some of the benefits in the next slides, but we have a tool that helps to immediately boost the compliance of your website while you are working on a plan. This doesn't fix everything. It's simply a suite of tools that we can add to your website that can help. If you do have an existing issue while it's being worked on, this serves as a stopgap. So it's one of the benefits I'll go into. But we also have strategy calls. So I'll go into a little bit more detail later, but as an offer just for CSPEN members, everyone's going to get an initial call, a 15-minute strategy call. And that's something where we can just kind of, we do a report of your website, a high-level assessment. Actually, Tom, we can go to the next slide, the membership option. So, so starting here with the standard membership, and Tom, we can just show them all 5 at once. But starting with number 1, so this is $550 a year risk assessment report. We do a high-level report of your website. Really, this is for you to understand what level are we. Have we done any type of assessment report? If you haven't, we can get one to you quickly, just showing that here's where you are, here's some of the current issues you have, and then fixes that you need to make. These aren't detailed fixes. We're not giving you like specific links and code changes and how to fix it. This is a free report that's just going to kind of help you on your way. And then we actually do a call follow-up with you to walk through that, make sure you're comfortable. We write an accessibility statement for your website. So after we talk to you, we understand what you're working on, we understand some of the timelines. We can put that together, put it in your website, in the footer typically, and really it's a way for everyone from students, prospects, and even some of the, surf by lawsuits where they're going to look and see that, okay, hey, they have an accessibility policy and they are working on it. So that accessibility statement is something that helps add protection. There's an accessibility badge. We do training resources. These are documents. Some of them are for beginners and they go to advanced, where there are, we have everything of just general concepts of accessibility to how do we make sure that a table on your website is accessible? What steps can you do? PDFs, how do you make them accessible? So we have some training resources for there. We're constantly adding more. And we also are going to be doing monthly webinars just on accessibility, going over some of the latest updates that we're seeing from either legal, technology, or what we're learning from some of the other groups that we're in, just to share that, to help you stay on top of it. So steps 1 to 3 here, we can have that completed in a couple days for you. Steps 4 and 5, that's up already. And then the support, that's something that we'll work with you individually to get you the report and set up calls, just to make sure your school is clear on where you are, and we can discuss some ideas moving forward. The next slide, Tom, this is Premier Membership. Really, the only difference here is that we are giving you an accessibility plugin for your website. This is what I mentioned earlier. What's an accessibility plugin? You may have heard of these, but really what it is, it's an icon that's going to, it would be placed on your website. And you can see in this slide, by clicking on that icon, it will open up a suite of accessibility tools. These tools help to overcome some of the most common issues, like I mentioned, unlabeled images, if there's color contrast issues. So this isn't just for blind users who may be on a screen reader, but low vision, colorblind, mobility issues, cognitive disorders. These tools can help overcome. One of the examples, keyboard operable. So your website has to be operable from just a keyboard only, not a mouse. So not everyone can use a mouse or a pointer. So some of the features in this suite, we can make it so that it can be, the tools can help. So just for the example of keyboard, if you're tabbing through your website, maybe you have a form, usually the tab key can take you to each field in the form. If your website does not automatically do that, it may prevent some users from completing your form. Well, this will override that. So it'll recognize that the tab key is not working, and it adds that accessibility as a stopgap measure, so that each field, each element on the page does become interactive. So it can even help keyboard-only users. So there's a suite. That's just some of the options in there. But there's this is something that we're finding. We're getting good feedback from users who may have had an issue. They open the tool, and then it can overcome some, not everything, but it's definitely beneficial to at least have that on the site. So that's a Premier Membership. So today, the next slide, Tom, 13. For CSPEN members, we have a promo code. If you go to our website, it's ndda.org. There's a Join Now button. If you click that, they'll have 2 membership options for you. If you enter the CSPEN 20 promo code, you're going to save $50 off. That's up for the next 2 days, I believe. So you'll save $50 off there. And also there's the 15-minute call. We usually just send the report. And in this case, every member, anyone who signs up, we will sit down and have that a call with you. Legal team can join, tech team, whomever. We've done it with various audiences, but really to make you feel comfortable with the report that you just received, and really hammer through some of the questions you have about, hey, Mike, what's our next steps? How do we move forward from here? So we like to do that to make sure that everyone's set up for success. And then I think, Tom, the last side is just a thank you and my contact information there. Yeah, website, phone number, and email if there's any questions. And Tom, I think we have time now if there's any questions from the team.
We do, Michael. Thank you very, very much for providing that information. One of the first questions is it a membership for each school or for all schools if they're a chain of 2 to 3 or 5 or more?
Yeah, good question. So each entity would have a membership. So if you have a single school, and let's say that you want multiple people from that school to be a member, that's fine. They can use the resources, but it is per company, because we're going to give you the plugin, and it would just, if it's school abc.edu, they will get the plugin. If you have other schools, then they would also have to be members. But once you are a member, anyone from that school can access that entire school's covered.
A number of people are asking, tell us more, if you can, Michael, about the transition of the utilization of this information, especially as they're looking at their curriculum and looking at the ways in which delivery in the new environment is their responsibility. What are you seeing nationwide, or what are you seeing in the broader context? Is this something people are starting to look at already, or is this something you project is coming down the road? How much time do they have? Those are some of the questions I'm seeing.
Yeah. I can going back just 10 years ago. I had the opportunity as when I was working in technology or marketing at different schools. I had the opportunity on working on some of the course development, and you literally get to sit down with some of the brightest minds in the business who are dedicated to their students, and they're working on excellent material. But what I found, and this is literally from teaching disabled students and having disabled users in my family, I started 10 years ago. It was just getting the knowledge into the PDF or the course, the online course. And now what we're really seeing is that built in the correct way so that the chart, the image, the tables are all being read, right? So now that we have a clear understanding of what those gaps are to different disabled users based on their disabilities, we're seeing companies, schools especially, go back and update the material so that that everything's inclusive and accessible, not just the text, for example. So is everyone accessible? Definitely not. I'm definitely seeing a rush to accessibility, especially over the past 18 months. Prior to that, it was not. It was not as much, but we are seeing that people actively working on that now.
Will NDDA also review a school's learning management system to deliver courses to give suggestions on accessibility with the course content?
Yeah, so this is just kind of the high level overview. We have done audits, extensive audits of internal systems, back-end systems, apps, things like that. So we have some companies who will say, hey, Mike, I like the membership. I need a little bit more help. I would like you to review our website and find all the issues for each template that we have, for example. So we can do that as extra add-on work, or we can even offer training internally to help you and your team understand it. And that's really kind of the NDDA is really, we are the experts, we've done this, but we want to empower you. The idea is that their team can do this going forward, right? So that they're not relying on external parties all the time. But we can definitely price that out and do different training or different audits if that's needed, of course.
Does specific guidance exist regarding products like Zoom, Skype, or others for providing temporary distance learning with ADA and WCAG compliance?
And so, yeah, and that's really, it does. It doesn't specifically name so much what content or what solution providers, like a Zoom. It doesn't say so much as Zoom needs to meet these guidelines. It really is the content that's presented. Can that be sent over to the end user who then can perceive the information, but then also alter it or change it so that they can understand it? And for example, if we have a video, we understand, the video, is there closed captioning, right? That's one thing. But then also, so if we have this video over Zoom, we can turn closed captioning on. Well, also for blind users specifically, and this is something with my former students that I saw was very, very beneficial to them, but often overlooked. So that video, is there an alternative available? An alternative could be a full text alternative, right? So we have a 5-minute video. If there is a Word document, let's just say, a text alternative, someone who is blind can put that into their screen reader and read all of the text, right? Maybe the video is instructional, and I have seen videos where there's an actor going through steps, completing something, doing something. A lot of it is just visual. Maybe there's a little bit of speech. Most of it is visual, and they're actually going through and doing those actions. That full text alternative, and this is regardless of agnostic of if it's Zoom or GoToMeeting or whomever, but is that alternative available so the blind user who can't see what's happening and what actions are happening, they can put everything in their screen reader that way and just run through and hear all the text. So it's really that content generator, making it so that it can be accessible in a variety of formats. I think that's the clearest way to cover that one.
What is the role of the Web Accessibility Compliance Officer?
Yeah. So this is we see lots of schools and schools I've worked with. Definitely, there's already a fantastic compliance teams, and they have a million different things that they're working with. But it's really just calling out to say, if you're a smaller school and maybe you can't have someone dedicated just to all of the changes. There were new guidelines released for WCAG, WCAG 2.1 last May. So if your internal compliance team is not already doing this, understanding the guidelines that are out there, and the changes and the new technology that's impacting those, that's somewhere we can come in with those webinars, right? So that we can explain changes that would not technically, not something that I would typically receive from compliance departments, and that's not a ding for anyone. That's simply that, for example, last year with iOS launching dark mode for their iPhone, it broke different screen readers and Zoom text and things like that you have to really have that close grasp to understand that here's the technology that's happening, here's how the guidelines are changing, and then here's what we own. We help to be able to bring and tie all those things together for you to say, hey, that mobile app that you have that's accessible, let's make sure that when it's in dark mode, this is something that these are two issues you need to also have your team work on now that Apple changed their iOS, for example. So it's kind of connecting those dots, and that's the value that we can help add.
I'm going to pose one myself. Obviously, schools right now, Michael, are having, and it's a Herculean effort to have had to do the mindset to shift and get all of not only the curriculum and the delivery of their education online, but also the notion of teleworking and other things and the like. Their time is compressed, their issues are mounting. They've got a number of different things that they're trying to do in terms of applications in order to receive funding from various areas for sustainability and the other. How long, I saw that you said that initial analysis of just the website can be a couple of days. How long do you think the time window is before this is at the top of the priority? I do recognize that something like this could be a portion of the funds that the institution receives for purposes of conversion and making sure certainly compliance should be part of where those funds could be utilized. How long do you think this process would take to deal with content, meaning curriculum as well as website and the other things? What's your normal run time?
Yeah. So this is, I'm going to give you kind of a scary number, and then it's important to know that it's not as bad as it always sounds. Sometimes when we have done full audits for companies or schools, we've come back with thousands of issues, right? So not just 4 or 5 mistakes, but you have the level of guidelines, and we can come out in and show here's where we don't conform to the guidelines, and here's how it impacts an end user. And you could have a large document with a lot of issues there. One of the things that we can help, though, is to really work with your team, provide the guidance on which ones are templates and which changes can be replicated. I've seen changes on a homepage or a template that could knock out 500 errors, 500 different issues, and replicates across. It really depends on the number of staff that we can dedicate to actually making the fixes. As auditors and the association, we don't access servers and make changes ourselves. We're going to provide the guidance, how to become compliant, what to do. We'll help train the team or work with the team. But I usually see that it usually takes companies about a year, and that's where it comes into that number one, that step planning on how do we prioritize once we get the audit back, or once we internally audit our stuff, how do we prioritize that? And that was my note about the highest usage, highest risk areas first, of promotional items, of applications, documents that they're downloading, the things that are getting the most use, that there's the most critical students. We should start with those items first, and then work our way back from there. So it's more than just brute force. It's kind of determining highest risk first.
Two questions, and I think they're part and partial. They came from different individuals, but I'll pose them together, and then you can kind of answer them maybe all at once or separately, depending on how you choose. please explain Section 508 compliance and specifically the consequences for non-compliance to a school. And then the, I think, related question is there a specific date that full compliance needs to be accomplished? Again, back to this compressed timeline, I think a lot of schools are trying to prioritize where things fall in their pecking order, and that's coming up repeatedly in the Q&A here. So,
Okay.
what's Section 508 compliance look like, and what are the timelines, and when could they expect somebody to be looking at them? I guess.
Mm-hmm. And you're saying someone looking at them like a plaintiff, a prospect, and someone who
anybody that could potentially do them harm.
Yeah. Okay, good. And I just wanted to make sure I was clear there. So going into Section 508, there's Title II, Title III of the ADA, and the Section 508 is something where I worked specifically with the Department of Defense. That's just me. Some of the other guys on our team worked with different entities, but for the government, working on Section 508, it's actually a level higher than what we typically see with Title III of the ADA. So there's actually a bit more guidelines of required of government agencies, and then that's also passed down to schools as well. So the Section 508 is actually more stringent than we would see as a public company. And one of the examples I always use is how with a typical corporation that we're looking at, if they have this accessibility to goods and offerings online where you can take courses, or you could have a certificate course, enroll in a degree program, having that so that a disabled user can have the same equal access as anyone else, right? So what we've seen people to say something along the lines of, hey, we're going to make a separate website just for disabled users, or we will just put a phone number on there and have them call up if they can't get, if the school's unable to, if the person has a problem, we just give them a phone number, have them call, and then we'll get back to them with a solution. And what we've seen in cases like with the MIT and distance learning, or cases with even kind of the Winn-Dixie and the corporation, where disabled users weren't able to buy some prescriptions and they weren't able to get some discounts that a regular user would. When you start to see that, when you see the divergence there of a user going through, a sighted user being able to access and do all these things, but a disabled user can't, that's when we see the complaints that will arise. And then that's when we start to see some of the attorneys getting involved, just, the students, for example, with MIT, who were not able to perceive all the data in some of their classes. And then that's when the lawyers were then pulled in. And so I think kind of covering all of this, it's out there, it's open now. You do have the drive-by, surf-by lawsuits from attorneys who are just hitting a homepage and then saying, oh, I did a quick automated scan, I see lots of issues, and they shoot off a demand letter or something. So that's happening now. I don't want to kind of sugarcoat anything. Like, you're definitely at risk now, but it really becomes apparent too when there's specific things that that prospect or that user can't access that other people can, and that's where it's seen as a discrimination, and that's where OCR and then the lawsuits can start.
So, and I'll ask it again, a naive question. This comes from me. So, Michael, is it more apt that you're likely to see this as a result of an individual seeking or searching to find their educational institution more so than once the individual is actually in their educational program, because you'll have known about the needs of the individual? And granted, you still have the requirements to accommodate those, but is
Right.
it more the enrollment and the front end versus the curriculum, or could it really span any of those areas?
I understand. There was curriculum. What we see with curriculum is if a school brings in a disabled student, they know that disability up front, typically with the application or the enrollment process, so that they know that handicap's available and they can make accommodations for it. So once they are already a student, there can still be issues, but there's typically terms and conditions and involved in the student enrollment and help offered prior to getting to that issue, or a specific person who that student can contact for additional help. So what we really see it is on the front end, because if that student comes to your school, we do see if there's, and I can tell you from my students, we're dozens, I wouldn't say hundreds, but dozens of students in my classes who would say, hey, Mike, I looked at 5 different colleges. The first 3 were not accessible, so I just dropped. I didn't even continue, right? You have that loss of potential revenue because the disabled student had problems accessing parts of the site. So there is a risk there. They'll just go to the school that is accessible. The complaints, though, that's where we're starting to see more of it arise, because there doesn't have to be that pre-existing relationship. It's not just the student, but the prospects coming saying, I can't even complete the application just because it's not accessible. And that's where the noise becomes, that's where they, then the attorneys can get involved. So it's kind of that upfront prospect, not enrolled student.
What about the request for a reasonable accommodation process? Do you all assist in that as well?
The reasonable accommodation is from that once they're a student and they're asking for it. I mean, we can absolutely talk about that, but usually that request, before they can even do that, if you don't have that accessibility statement on your website saying here's who we are, or here's our email, here's our phone number, please contact us. We do see some people doing that. But I think before they even do that request for a reasonable access, they don't have to. They can just reach out to an attorney, or make some noise online, hurt PR or whatever, brand reputation. We're seeing some people not even doing that and reaching out to the company, just saying, throwing their hands up and going online and complaining, or talking to an attorney, or just going to another school. So.
The ADA compliance and the OCR stuff that was back on one of the early slides. 2007, am I correct, is when the ADA stuff came into, a lot of people are continuing to ask, what's the date for compliance? What would you say in answer to that response?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, going back to the ADA, like not just in 1998 is when they had the electronic and information and technology updates, where that 1998 is that date where the ADA, and this is where they specifically are, once 98 came and showed that digital properties must be accessible too, that it is discrimination, not just kind of that physical environment, let's say like a wheelchair ramp at a school is it needs to be installed. 98 is when it became crystal clear from the DOJ that now this is impacting digital properties. And after that, the National Federation of the Blind suing Target, Chase, where I started working after 2003, after they were sued for accessibility. That's when some of the lawsuits started, all the way back in 98. So when that happened, that was 1998. That timeline, there's no window now of you have 30, 60, or 90 days to become compliant. It's in any court case I've been in, or demand letter I've reviewed on behalf of a client, it shows if there is no timeline of when you need to become compliant. It was that came out 20 years ago. So right. We're already late.
And your slide speaks specifically to the OCR technology guidelines from 2010, and also the ADA modifications, the reauthorization in 2017 for the updates for Section 508, which is where it really started to crystallize some of this, right? So it's been on the books for many, many, many years, but it's been updated more recently from OCR in 2010 and from ADA specifically in 2017, correct?
Yeah, that's just the most recent versions I had on there.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah. Yep. Sure.
Any other questions? And if you guys are hanging on, some 198 of you still hanging on, if you're hanging on, I might give you a little advanced treat of one of the documents I'm working on for you guys, and with regard to the grants.gov funding. But any more questions for Michael at this point? Well, Michael, bear with us. I'm going to share something with them that goes a little different direction, if I can put it on the screen.
Okay.
See if I can do this. There we go. Put that there. Bring this forward and open. One of the things that we are working on here at CSPEN is a continuation. We've gotten many questions about the application process for the recipients, read students, side of the emergency financing stabilization funds, the higher education emergency relief fund. What we are working on is this document and a slide presentation, as I said, for a week from today, where we will go through step by step. This is some of my early work on this, on how long it's going to take you in various portions of the process. Certainly this differs from institution to institution. Some of you will have already had your DUNS numbers for quite some time. Some of you will find that you had them, but you didn't realize that you might not have updated information. And so they will be asking you to go back and re-look at all of the information and align it. You have to do these things in incremental steps, or the process will default you out or not allow you to go to the next portion or fill out next portions of your forms. So we're going to go through what it looks like to reattain your DUNS number, or do the additional things you need to do there, what you need to do to register for SAM. This is the part of the process that specifically and particularly for a number of our institutions is new, because we've never been on the grant side before. Again, some schools have their SAM numbers, others, do not. This is the part of the process that takes a while. Once you get this from SAM, you still then have to get your CAGE information. All of this will become more apparent to you as you go through this process. But SAM gives you a notification and a notarization on top of the notary you sent them. You have to go into a separate web page, use all of this information to establish your CAGE ID. Only once you have your SAM and your CAGE ID can you go back to grants.gov and continue the process that you probably have been frustrated that you couldn't complete here. That includes your FS 424 form, as well as your recipients, i.e. students, fund certification and agreement, and a number of other documents that you have to provide. And there are points in this process where it doesn't tell you, but the best way to work the system is you put in certain amounts of information, literally log off in order for the system to take it in, and then log back on in a different way in order to get the next few steps completed. I know it sounds peculiar, but bear with me when I tell you that, having walked through this with several schools that have successfully completed the entire process and the submission, and several of them that have actually already received their recognition, there are ways to navigate this, but it is far from simplistic, and it is far from as intuitive as one might have hoped. We are working on, again, putting this all together. I'm going to include some more screenshots along with the arrows and the like as we go through this. But again, just know that we are very much aware here at CSPEN and have fielded questions. Jerry and I fielded, we counted over 250 questions from Friday when we put forth our first update with regard to the announcement, and 9 o'clock Easter Sunday. So we are trying to get as much information to you as we can. For those of you who have not received responses of us, I am trying diligently, and so is Jerry, to put together a number of those and put them out in an FAQ, but also respond to each of you, individually. As you might imagine, continuing to track all this, continuing to learn, and then continuing to try and report on it all in a timely fashion and respond to over all of those emails is a little bit challenging, but we're doing the best we can. So know that that is coming. Again, I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you to Michael. Michael, thank you yet again for providing us with information on issues of compliance that have been there for certainly a while, that we may or may not be as up on as we would like, as well as discussions about the conversion. One of the reasons that there was conversations, we don't normally do sales pitches, but in the notion that you as institutions are going to have finances that are available to you to assist with technology conversion as a result of COVID. Some of those funds certainly can be utilized to help with the entire process, intake as well as curriculum and the continuum, which is why we noted that as part of the process. We also would be remiss if we didn't remind you that in addition to my presentation next Thursday, Dr. Leah Matthews, who is the head of DEAC, the Distance Education Accrediting Commission, will be with us next Tuesday for an hour. She will be sharing information on what her institutions, certainly very, very much already attuned to online education, are doing to assist institutions in either doing their own conversion in disciplines similar to theirs, or literally partnering in some cases with institutions to help to the continuation of the education and the sustaining of the education for students as a partnership. She'll also be talking about the Department of Education's Distance Education and Innovation Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that was published on April 2nd, and the deadline for comments on that particular NPRM are May 4th. We, CSPEN, will be working on our own response, certainly in collaboration with the community and knowledgeable and lauded individuals like Dr. Matthews. And she will also have a conversation on the back end about a number of research and things that she and others are doing that suggest that, again, as you all have tipped your toe into the water of distance education and online in various modalities, a discussion about whether or not this truly might be the tipping point that people have discussed in terms of online versus bricks and mortar education. Not that bricks and mortar is going to go away, but are the hybrids going to be something that we see more of in the future now that people have been forced into at least a gunshot wedding would be my term, sorry for the colorful use, but a forced set of circumstances right now that may or may not prove to be an eye-opener on ways in which institutions could provide education going forward. Coming full circle back to Michael, we certainly need to make sure that we're in compliance with all of the various different forms of regulations that are upon us as we provide that quality education to our students, and certainly the ability to be mindful of the Americans with Disabilities Act and all of the concerns and desires to provide equal benefits for that population are part of what we need to keep in our mind's eye. With that, I want to thank Michael one last time for joining us today. I want to say yet again on behalf of CSPEN, be safe, be healthy, do what you can to stay at home, and we will be back in touch next Tuesday and next Thursday. Thank you and have a great weekend.